Swatantra Veer Savarkar, a name all of us know, many of us cherish, a lot of us also, find fault with him. But whatever you may do, you cannot ignore him. So, to highlight Veer Savarkar once again, we've got Vikram Sampath here, who has written a wonderful book on him. So, please subscribe to the channel and look at the description where you have all the links, including the contribution link and the social media link. And let's go in straight to Vikram. Welcome, Vikram ji. Welcome to Jaipur Dialogues.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. Thank you for inviting me.
And I have been going through this, I should say, the tome of yours, and it is too big and it is too comprehensive, and so many references to check that I think I'm still, kind of. I'm actually flitting from part to part. I'm not reading it in one sequence. So, out of that, whatever I have found interesting, I have you here, readers. This is the book, Vikram Sampath's book, part 2 of Savarkar, A Contested Legacy. So, let me first, have Vikram himself talk about the book as he has done in his preface, prologue, what he says, and also the first chapter is what is called the Rising from the Ashes, that actually deals with the release of Savarkar and his stay in Ratnagiri after 14 years of incarceration. So you can give me a brief overview, and then we will go to my questions.
Right. Thank you, Sanjay ji. It's a great pleasure, an honor to be part of the Jaipur Dialogues. I think I've highly watched and appreciated forum. On about these two volumes, in fact, I think it was long overdue. Just before getting on to the broadcast, we were talking about how the last biography, the comprehensive biography, at least in English, that was written on Savarkar was by Dhananjay Keer in the 1960s when Savarkar was still alive. And Dhananjay Keer was an acolyte, he was a follower and adherent. So a lot of the accounts there, while it's a very laudable attempt to put all aspects of Savarkar's life together into one place, it borders also on a hagiographical account of the man. But it really, when my interest in Veer Savarkar was peaked, it started, in 2004 when this whole argument around him, when the Vajpayee government put his photograph in Central Hall of Parliament, and also the plaque at Cellular Jail, which later Mani Shankar Iyer got removed. It was then that my interest in this man, who never formed a part of our history textbooks, as a student of CBSE, I don't remember ever having come across him in my history. Then I don't know how it is now. So that's when my interest in him was peaked, and thereafter I think the manner in which Savarkar's name gets invoked in contemporary politics almost on a daily basis, during election rallies, during speeches, in manifestos, whether to give him Bharat Ratna or not forms part of manifestos of political parties. But for all this hullabaloo about him, there is so little scholastic and academic work that people can fall back on to kind of analyze the man, what his views were, what his philosophy was. So if a young person who is not really interested so much in politics but wants to understand what Savarkar stood for, there's so little to fall back on. And also a lot of what Savarkar wrote himself was copiously in Marathi, his mother tongue in which he wrote, which have been out of bounds for a lot of mainstream historians, either willfully or because of their lack of knowledge of the language. But luckily, since I understand Marathi, it was a lot of work to also read the man in the first person, also visit numerous archives across India and also outside. I spent several months in London at the British Archives there and the National Archives of UK, the British Library in Paris and Germany, and where there are copious amounts of material about Savarkar. Also, the early Indian revolutionary movement, which happened largely from Europe. All of this, which has been very, very craftily, I think, suppressed from popular discourse. Even the story of our freedom struggle has been told to us in a very, very simple and linear fashion, where the armed struggle or the story of the revolutionaries almost appears like a footnote in our books. So these two volumes, in my view, are not only the story of Savarkar, but in a very humble attempt to also portray a parallel narrative to the mainstream freedom movement, and also to demystify a lot of myths and assumptions about Savarkar, and also about some of the other main key players of the time who played a very important role in the run-up to freedom. And I think this year, particularly since we're celebrating the Amrit Mahotsav, it's time that we look back with a more dispassionate, objective, and unemotional view of our own past, particularly about our freedom struggle, and reevaluate these very, very difficult and contentious figures of the past.
Quite right. And let's go into your book. And what I found very interesting was chapter 3 of your book on a communal question. And I find earlier also, and whatever references that you've given, that we find that a very sharp mind that understands the issues at hand. And you have quoted Anshuddhi movement. There is a reference to Shaukat Ali's uh, discussions or conversation
Yeah.
with Savarkar. Uh, and I think it is very good of you to have found it out from some Marathi references and reproduce it. I would like you to dilate upon a little bit and try and find the mind of the man.
Yeah, that's a tough task. But then, that particular interview between Shaukat Ali and Savarkar in 1925, I think that kind of posits the clash of
Just
ideas.
one sec for the viewers. Shaukat Ali was one of the leaders of the Khilafat movement.
Yeah,
Muhammad
yeah,
Ali Johar and Shaukat Ali, the two brothers,
yeah.
the Ali brothers, as you
Ali
know.
brother. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's Shaukat Ali,
Yeah,
younger
they have
brother.
a meeting in Bombay in 1925, and Shaukat Ali is trying to tell Savarkar to give up on the Shuddhi movement, because Shuddhi, which was a mechanism which the Arya Samaj had begun, where people who were converted out of the Hindu faith, there could be a mechanism to bring them back to their parental faith if they felt the need to do so. And the Arya Samaj, particularly Swami Shraddhanand, who was conducting a lot of Shuddhi movements across Western and Northern India, Northwestern India, the Northwest Frontier Province, and UP, and so on. Now, this dialogue where he says, you must give it up because it is very, very antagonistic to to both Hindu-Muslim unity, and also it threatens the Muslim community. To which, I mean, there's a long, it's a 6-page, dialogue between the two, which I've reproduced in toto, and I think that posits not only Savarkar's views on this, but also it's very contemporary. We seem to be having the same kind of dialogues, the same kind of debates and discussions 100 years later, and which shows that socially we don't seem to have gone any further from that. So, among many things, Savarkar says, for centuries, if there is a dacoit who is coming and looting our house, and today we have become aware and we are actually bolting our door and putting a lock on it, it's not the dacoit's case to come and say, you doing this is actually depriving us of our right to loot you. We are not here to attack the dacoit. Let the dacoit beware what he wants to do, but we will no longer allow them to infringe on our property. And I think that is the crux of the whole thing. And he also says this, and I'd like to quote directly what he says in that conversation. He says, our organization, the Hindu Sangathan that he had started, is not against you, as in the Shaukat Ali or anybody else. It is only for self-defense and protection against any kind of atrocity that we may face now or in the future. as long as the Hindu Sangathan movement is not violent, not aggressive, not usurping of your rights, property, or life, and as long as it stands for truth and self-protection, why should anyone have a grouse with it? As long as all these communal movements and missions of Aga Khan, Hassan Nizami, or the Khilafat carry on, as long as thousands of Hindus are being forcibly converted and coerced, as long as Urdu newspapers openly proclaim the agenda to mass convert Hindus in the next 5 to 10 years, advising us Hindus to give up any attempts to organize and protect ourselves for the sake of some mirage that you call as national unity is utter hypocrisy. Unquote. So Hindutva that he postulated to, and today we have all these dismantling global Hindutva and all of this that is being spoken about. It was a resistive force. It was not a predatory force. Just like Hinduism, the religion or the faith is not predatory. It is not proselytizing. So also Hindutva was an extension of that, which is Hinduism that resists, Hinduism that organizes, Hinduism that protects itself without being predatory on anybody, without being violent or being the first person who's actually giving that slap. But then if someone is giving you a slap, it would not subscribe to the Gandhian view that you show your other cheek, but slap two back. So I think that was the fulcrum of the entire philosophy when it came to Savarkar's stand on numerous issues. And the 1920s, the kind of communal pogroms that happened, unfortunately, in different parts of India, starting from the Mopla carnage against the Nayars of Malabar, and in Kohat, in Panipat, in Gulbarga, in Delhi, in Bengal and Calcutta, different parts of India, and even the murder of Swami Shraddhanand of the Arya Samaj by a Muslim fanatic, Abdul Rashid, to which the response of the Congress and particularly Gandhiji was extremely condescending, very, very pusillanimous. Gandhiji termed the Moplas as brave men who were fighting for the cause of their faith, whereas these were the barbarians who had actually killed in broad daylight men, women, and children. How could an apostle of non-violence and peace actually condone such a barbaric act? And when Abdul Rashid killed Swami Shraddhanand in Delhi, again in broad daylight in his house, Gandhi refused to even acknowledge him as an assassin, and he called him my dear brother Abdul Rashid. And we need to get into the psyche of the assassin, and that Hindus need to, reflect. Why did the assassin pick up the gun? So the onus is never on condemning the assassin, but then to monkey balance and create this false equivalence that even if a crime is committed against you, you need to introspect and say, why did that person commit that crime? You will not condemn the person who actually committed the crime. But it's in a sad irony of turn of events, 2 decades later, when Gandhiji himself was murdered by Nathuram Godse, none of the Gandhian followers called him my dear brother Godse or tried to understand the psyche of the assassin. Instead,
in fact, if I remind you from in this narrative only, you mentioned Gopinath Saha's case.
Yes. Yeah.
Whom Gandhi did not call his brother, and in fact, he was pretty violent against him.
Jatin Das, so many others of the revolutionary movement. So so the same Gandhian, peace-loving Gandhians, when they went on a rampage and conducted a carnage of Maharashtrian Brahmins in 1948 after Gandhi's assassination, only because Godse and Apte were Maharashtrian Brahmins. I think there the entire edifice of this philosophy had collapsed. There was nobody who was willing to listen to these preachings of non-violence, which had been dinned into their heads for 2-3 decades then. So I think constantly, Sanjay ji, if you see that chapter and also the previous chapter, there's a running feud between Savarkar and Gandhi for everything that Gandhi wrote in his Young India, in Harijan and all of that. Savarkar would put a rebuttal in the Shraddhanand, whether it was on his views on the caste system, which Gandhi thought was the bedrock, Varnashram as the bedrock of Hinduism, whether it was his views on untouchability, whether it was Hindu-Muslim unity, his views on the revolutionaries, whom he refused to sympathize with, even when people like Jatin Das went on a hunger strike and died, and thereby there was different classes for political prisoners which came about, class A, class B, and so on, none of which Gandhi ever made common cause with. And of course, when Bhagat Singh was executed, did he actually help? Did Gandhi actually help the cause of saving his life, which he could have, because he was currently then in conversation with Lord Irwin, the viceroy for the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. So a lot of these issues, there were ideological differences between these two men, and constantly Savarkar was taking the bull by its horn and attacking him for everything that he did.
Yes, and you also mentioned, I've noted this point, where Savarkar actually joins issue with him on his basic understanding of non-violence.
Hmm.
And in fact, I have also written quite a lot on that, and also talked about it quite a lot, because the understanding of Gandhian non-violence doesn't come from the Indian tradition. It
Yeah.
seems to come from the Eastern Orthodox Church, or maybe from
Yeah.
Tolstoy.
Yeah.
And if you read his work, Hindu Swaraj, that
Yeah.
Hindu Swaraj is, I find it quite childish, the
Hmm.
kind of examples that are given there. And it is on that basis that he conducted his so-called non-violence, and even justified that on the basis of Gita, which Savarkar completely contradicts. In my
Yeah.
opinion, rightly so. What's your take?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the differences go back even as young men, when I think 1909, just after Madanlal Dhingra's execution, which Gandhi actually condemns, as do almost all the leaders of the Congress. Madanlal Dhingra, the famous revolutionary, and acolyte of Savarkar, who killed Lord Curzon Wiley in Britain, who was doing all this surveillance on Indian students there. Just after that, there is this meeting in India House where all these revolutionaries lived, and
Yes.
Gandhi also comes there. And it is the time of Dashera, and they're all asked to speak. And Gandhi says, "I will not talk anything political. I will rather postulate on the greatness of what an ideal state should be, and why it should be called Ram Rajya." And he speaks eloquently about it. And after that, Savarkar comes on stage, and the first thing he does is rebut every point of Gandhi's speech, saying, we're speaking of Ram Rajya, but even to establish Ram Rajya, Ram had to kill Ravan. He did not go and sit in Satyagraha in front of him, and Ravan led Sita away. So there had to be violence there, and violence for the establishment of good. And yeah, like you rightly said, in the Indian ethos or in the Hindu ethos, that was never considered a bad to annihilate evil. So he also in that speech says, we are talking this in Dashera, the 10 days when the Devi is venerated with, in her different forms, and she has so many astras and shastras. These are not for ornamental purposes. That is to kill the evil. So if you consider the British Raj as an evil force, which has to be killed and annihilated, picking up arms for that is perfectly justified. So I think there was that fundamental difference. Both of them, at the end of the day, I think both of them wanted India to be free. They looked at a free country as the ultimate goal. But I think the road, the means, the path to that were completely different, and that is where this clash of ideas, the clash of the different paths to freedom come about. And for the longest time, we have been only eulogizing one path, as that is the road that got us freedom. दे दी हमें आजादी बिना खड़ग बिना ढाल बिना साबरमती के संत
That
तुने
I have exposed in my book.
कर
Very
दिया
good.
कमाल. Yes, so from 1857 to the naval mutiny of 1946, the unending stream of armed resistance and of the revolutionary movement, which has been sadly underestimated or underrepresented in our historiography. That's where Savarkar posits, because he was the central figure in that movement too, as the intellectual corpus, someone who called this the first war of Indian independence, the 1857, which was still then called a Sepoy Mutiny. Someone who wrote a book which became inspiration for revolutionaries decades after he wrote it, be it Bhagat Singh or even Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and the INA, to Rash Bihari Bose and several others. So I think this clash of ideas, the clash of two different ideas of India, is what we see manifesting itself between this Gandhi Savarkar foil that keeps coming up all the time.
Yes, I think it is fitting that he postulated his thoughts on in Hindu-Muslim unity in those terms, and towards that freedom. That very famous quote,
Yeah.
I think you can elaborate on it. If you come with you, if you do not, if you,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
particular quote.
Yeah. So I think no, constantly this premium that was being put
Yeah,
to
I'll just quote that
yes.
on Hindu Muslim unity. Savarkar said to Muslims, if you come, with you; if you don't, without you; and if you oppose, in spite of you. The Hindus will continue to fight for their national freedom as best as they can. And I think that should always have been the right way. And even
Yeah.
today, we do not seem to have learned from that. Even today, we keep bending over backwards and we keep making different kind of postulates. It's
Yeah.
something as straight as that, and that also comes from, uh, I should say, a non-understanding of Islam. Sorry
Yeah.
to say that.
Yeah. Fully agree. I think, and I think people like Savarkar, even Ambedkar, whom I've quoted extensively
Yes,
in
yes, 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 yes.
the book,
I
whom very
100%
conveniently,
agree.
yeah, whom conveniently people kind of, don't bring to light today. Of course, it is coming out, but then the views of Ambedkar on Islam, or what it means, or why he feels that this is a clash of two complete different civilizations who can never coexist. And Savarkar still wanted the Hindus and Muslims to stay in India under a secular constitutional law framework. But Ambedkar thought that was illogical and a queer suggestion of Savarkar, because he said these are two different nations, there are two different people, and Islam will not allow an Indian Muslim to be loyal to this nation, because it will always be seen as a Darul Harb. Until the time it is converted into Darul Islam, the fight will keep going on. And so, and the context of, say, the Caliphate agitation, which very nicely the wordplay Khilafat, people are made to believe that it is Angrezon ki Khilafat करते हुए movement, not realizing that that movement was launched by Gandhiji to establish a caliphate in Turkey, Islamist, pan-Islamist movement, which was like what we are seeing today, maybe in Afghanistan, ruled by the Sharia. You don't have to mobilize people of this country and barter their support to the national freedom struggle in return for you're supporting this movement. Why should it matter? And I think it was R.C. Majumdar who said that by doing that, Gandhi himself somewhere implicitly seemed to have conceded that the Muslims of India do not belong to this country, because if some other country's concerns are what are primary for them, which is what makes them participate in the freedom struggle, then it's very, very problematic. So I think these issues, right from the Khilafat movement to the separateness that was sown therein, whether from the Morley Minto reforms, the communal award, of course, the Government of India Act of 1919, all of these which gave disproportionate representation to a particular community. And the British were doing this, I think, largely because they needed the Muslim support in the British Indian Army, which, like even Ambedkar flags that off, that by the time of the Second World War, almost 60 to 70% of the Indian Army was composed of Muslims. And in fact, there is that very telling anecdote which I quote in the book, that when Mountbatten was coming to India, he has a meeting with Churchill, and Churchill, tells him that ensure that not a strand of hair of the Muslims is, affected, because they have been our biggest support. They have been the strength of the British Indian Army, and we need to protect them, because once we leave, the Hindus and Muslims are getting into a civil war. So that was also one reason why Savarkar and the Hindu Mahasabha, particularly, people like Dr. Munjay and others, were talking about a militarization drive, where you're going to
I'll
increase.
just put a small factual correction.
Yeah.
That's what Dr. Ambedkar said, because I quoted him extensively in my own book, Unbreaking India. And there's a chapter, the military question. There's a full chapter which I have written. What he said that it would have been 60-70% if not for Savarkar. And because of Savarkar, at the end of the World War, it was 34%.
Yeah.
So that particular contribution of Savarkar is also needs to be flagged, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. Which people then, kind of say he was actually helping the British enlist people in the Indian army. But that is a fallacious argument, because in the First World War, then Gandhi was enlisting people to fight for the British in the Indian army. So when that is okay, then this is also okay. But then, majority of the people who are also getting into the army, they were providing the feeder circuit for the Indian National Army of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, which many of them defected. Some of the letters that I've quoted in my book of some of these soldiers during the INA trials that happened in 1946, they openly concede that we joined the army on the advice of Barrister Savarkar and then defected over after getting militarily trained. We defected to the INA. So not only was it helping to militarize Hindus for self-defense in the eventuality of a civil war that was facing everyone in the eye once the British left, but also to ensure that the movement for freedom struggle led by the INA had a lot of feeder circuit, had a lot of young men who could get into the INA. So there was a dual purpose of this militarization, which people do not comprehend completely.
Right. And Dr. Ambedkar suggests, and I have, in fact, asserted emphatically that if not for this militarization drive, if not for limiting the Muslim proportion in the army to 34%, Pakistan would have taken the whole of Punjab and the whole of Bengal.
Yeah.
That's my assumption, of course.
Yeah.
Then there is this question which comes up often, very often. And of course, a lot of people say that, okay, he was the one who postulated the two nation theory. Of course, I have my own views. I want to hear you.
What could be, I mean, when the very first time the fact that, two nations and all this concept was spoken of by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan in the 1880s, when Savarkar was probably not even born or just 4-5 years old. So I'm sure he didn't inspire Sir Syed Ahmad Khan to think so. But then ever since that time, I mean, the entire lead up, it was not an overnight idea. Of course, in 1857, the two communities perhaps fought together, which even Savarkar talks about. But after the defeat in 1857, the Muslims particularly realized, and that the birth of the Aligarh Muslim movement too, that we've done a wrong thing by antagonizing the British. So we've deprived ourselves of English education. We've also deprived ourselves of government jobs and so on. So now let's build bridges with the British government. And so since then, almost there was a constant criticism of the Congress too, and the Congress the Muslim participation in Congress annual conferences between 1885 and 1905 fell from about 15% to about 3-4% by 1905 at the peak of the partition of Bengal, which many Muslim leaders and intellectuals supported, that there should be a separate country on the East Bengal. So this constant desire, which the Aligarh movement actually envisioned, of a separate Muslim unit, may not be a separate country at a point, but a separate kind of an autonomous unit within the Indian body politic, was something that was always a romantic visualization. We romanticize Allama Iqbal, but then his conception of the holy state and how that is a virtue to live up to, that these seeds of discord, the seeds of separateness, and like I mentioned earlier, the separate electorate being given disproportionate representation, the Khilafat, and all these, and the way the government was actually acceding to this, and the premium that even the Congress leaders, particularly the Hindu leaders, were putting to Muslim support and participation in the freedom movement, made them also up their bargaining power. The more you give a person a lot of importance, they will try to get a lot out of you, and that was exactly what was happening. So this two nation theory was something that had been in vogue since the 1880s, or since that time, because fundamentally, Sanjay ji, I think a lot of, especially the Muslim elite, could not make peace with the fact that the Hindus were their subjects at some point, and now to break common bread with them, and then in the eventuality of the British leaving, for them to be taken over if majority rule is what is going to happen in a democracy. So this need for a separateness, separate protection of your own fiefdoms, that was a constant demand. But time and again, when even in Savarkar's lifetime, the comparisons were made that he and Jinnah were two sides of the same coin and all of that, to which he emphatically rejects it, saying Jinnah and I are completely different, while he talks for concessions. I, as in Savarkar, would look for equal opportunities for everybody. And whether it was Savarkar or Ambedkar, they did agree that these were two, as I said, a clash of ideas, a clash of theologies, a clash of civilizations. And there are two nations, so to say, as long as, according to Savarkar, as long as there is a larger ummah, a faith-based brotherhood to which people owe allegiance, and there is extraterritorial allegiance to causes that don't concern India, but countries like Turkey and other places. Till that time, there are going to be two nations. But once that goes, and once there is this emotional integration, then the two can weld harmoniously. And in fact, he time and time again says that till the time you keep asserting your Muslim identity, I will keep asserting my Hindu identity. The day you drop that, I am Vishwamanav. I believe in Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. So I will take 10 steps ahead and embrace you. So the onus of any relationship, any friendship is two-sided. It cannot be one-sided, where on the one side, people are talking of separateness. People are talking not only politically, but also theologically, where if you do not believe in my way, then you are condemned to hell and all of that. Then union of minds and harmony is very, very difficult to forcibly weld together. And I think these leaders understood this problem very, very acutely. So to accuse him of two-nation theory and all that is, as I said, he kept saying that I know that there are two nations as long as there's this allegiance. But once that goes, we can live together. In his Hindu Rashtra Darshan, or even in that Constitution of Free Hindustan state that the Hindu Mahasabha drafted in 1945, the constant emphasis was in this Hindu Rashtra that he envisioned. The majorities are not going to get extra concessions because they were more in number, and conversely, the minorities also will not get any extra privileges. Everybody is equal in the eyes of the law. Your faith is your private business. Do it in your house. Don't bring it to the street or into public policy. And there's not going to be a state religion of a Hindu Rashtra. It's Hindu not in terms of its religious connotation, but it's a cultural and a national identity, which was what Hindutva was for him.
Quite right. Actually, this whole business of two-nation theory comes from the basic Islamic theology from the Holy Book itself. And in India, it was very well articulated by Sheikh Ahmad Sarhindi right in the 16th century. It's there in his letters, Maktubat of Sheikh Ahmad Sarhindi. And then it goes on. Then it goes on to Fatawa Alamgiri, which I am getting translated, by the way, into Hindi.
Yeah.
Because I think the whole discourse will change after we get a translation. Then Shah Waliullah, and after that you have the your Devbandi movement, Sayyid Ahmad Khan, all that. It's been there forever. But would you also say that with the kind of modern postulation of Hinduism, the Hindutva that we like to, a lot of people like to so flog, is actually modernized Hinduism?
Yeah. Yes, totally. I think Hindutva, on the one hand, is, according to me, not only Hinduism that resists, as I said, Hinduism that organizes, but also Hindu modernity. And while right from Adi Shankaracharya to Madhvacharya to Ramanujacharya to the Bhakti saints to later on, of course, whether it was Sri Aurobindo or Swami Vivekananda, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Ramana Maharshi, all of them spoke of this larger, cultural, social revival and a religious, purge of the society. Savarkar could be credited to add to this, to expand that scope of Hindutva to also a sense of nationalism, a sense of, going where your Hindu-ness was beyond your just being a Hindu by your faith. So I think this enlargement of that term, and an important part of this consolidation was also to ensure that a lot of the social evils that faced Hinduism, particularly the caste splinters into which we had broken up into, is something that was completely removed. And so a completely casteless society, where, contrary to the popular narrative of only, it's the upper caste oppressing the lower caste, Savarkar actually stood for a annihilation of caste even among the so-called lower castes, and those are his letters and dialogue with Ambedkar, where he says, the Mahars, the community to which Ambedkar belonged, in turn would not allow those subcastes which came under it in the social hierarchy to enter a Mahar temple or a Mahar Vada, or take water from the Mahar well. So that is also caste system. That also needs to be removed. So everything, the entire edifice of the caste discrimination to be removed, and a purge of society. So that is modernity in its best sense, where all these social evils are removed, superstitions are removed, a modern, progressive, scientific outlook to life. So other than along with the religious connotations and the religious consolidation, the reform of the society too, I think, forms a very important component of the Hindutva project.
And also, I think he was looking at an industrialized society.
Yes, yeah, industrial. But at the same time, someone for whom nation was servopari, to an extent that he said labor, capital, industry, everything needs to be nationalized. So to some extent, a socialist view, which I think Indira Gandhi was to my mind, a huge Savarkarite. She did a lot of things.
She was fascinated by Savarkar too.
Yeah, I mean, she was the one who gave money to his memorial. She brought out a stamp. She brought out a movie. She brought Madanlal Dhingra's ashes back to India and got that, idol in his name. She did to Pakistan, which probably no Prime Minister of India has ever done, by dismembering that country. So to a large extent, I think she postulated, I mean, she lived the what Savarkar would postulate.
Okay, let's come to his Hindu Mahasabha years and after. And I just want to talk about, because there are already 37 minutes. So, two major points still left. And one is about the 1940s to Quit India movement. And Dhananjay Keer has written that Savarkar caught Congress pants down when they accepted the Cripps Commission suggestion that the provinces be allowed to secede. And when he built up a huge resistance against that, then in order to hide their shame, they hurriedly announced Quit India movement, and which was destined to flop, and it flopped within a week.
Yeah, true. In fact, yeah, the Cripps mission, where the Congress was willing to, in lieu of the defense portfolio, and I think all the newspapers were agog that Jawaharlal Nehru is going to be the first defense minister, under the Viceroy. It was almost a done deal. The only political formation which opposed the Cripps mission completely was the Mahasabha, on this ground that we would have had a splintered India. I mean, not even a concept of India, where every province could secede either to Pakistan or to the Indian Federation, or form individual units, the princely states. We would have had a chaos in this subcontinent. That was something, just for the defense portfolio, the Congress was willing to sign on it. And for what reasons? I mean, finally, the British records say it was Gandhi who put a spanner in the works and ensured that the Cripps mission failed. But whatever be it, it was also Gandhi's position in the Congress becoming very untenable by then. And, the fact that without his consent, Maulana Azad and Nehru were doing these negotiations and all of that. So to stamp his authority back in the party which he had held under his fist, the Quit India movement was launched in a haste, as you rightly said, and even by Gandhi's own standards. There was zero amount of planning. There was no clear objectives in mind. And there was opposition to the Quit India not only by those outside the Congress, but several people inside, including the Congress president, Maulana Azad, who writes in his memoirs extensively, which I quote, saying that, we have no agenda, we have no program. And Gandhi said, yeah, the British will allow me to develop this movement slowly, and then we will come about to negotiation. But the British were not in any mood to, oblige the old man anymore, because Japan was waiting to strike at the gates of India, and at such a time to create this was something that nobody, including in the Congress, including Gandhi's most trusted, adherent in the Congress, Rajagopalachari, who said, Gandhi's idea that quit India but leave your army behind, where India would have become a bastion for the war, for American, a military base for the war in Asia. Rajaji considered that to be the worst form of British imperialism, where there would be military rule without any civil government in place. So there was lots and lots of opposition to this by several people. Ambedkar called it a treachery, the Quit India movement as a treachery to the nation, and how it's a patriotic duty of every Indian not to support this movement. And within as you said, in a couple of days of the launch in August, the first week, they were all put in jail. And the movement was leaderless. It had no program. This do or die, it meant different things to different people. Many of the people, the revolutionaries, the underground movements, the army, all of them went up in arms. It became the most violent sort of movement. And contrary to what, one Chauri Chora incident could lead to the complete collapse of non-cooperation, in this case, there was violence across the nation. So that, of course, the violent aspect of it did scare the British, and particularly the seeds of rebellion that were being sown in the army, which they always feared. But interestingly, the Congress themselves disowned themselves of the Quit India movement. And Nehru himself in his memoir said, we have nothing to do with this. 2 decades we've been talking about non-violence, but nobody has understood this, and so on. So quickly they apna palla jhad diya, saying we have nothing to do with this movement. But today, the same Congress would come up and say those who did not participate in the Quit India movement are not freedom fighters. But during their time, the Congress party itself disowning it because of its violent nature, and because for 2 years after that, all the Congress leaders were lodged in luxurious palaces and prisons to stay away from the movement, which gave also further fillip to the Muslim League to formalize its plans for partition. And those crucial years when the Muslim League could have been checked, I think the Congress literally gave away Pakistan on a platter to Jinnah.
Yes, they did. And in fact, this 1942 blunder probably broke the trust between Congress and the British completely.
Yeah.
So now let's come to the final point, because we're already almost over time. So Savarkar getting snared in the Gandhi murder.
Yeah. Well, that again, Sanjay ji, I think that will need another 1 hour. But in brief, the entire edifice of the prosecution, which implicated him in the murder, was on that the police approver Digambar Badge's confession, where it was a conjecture that he just said, and under police coercion in Bombay, that he made this confession that Nathuram and Apte and Badge himself, who was an arms dealer, this Digambar Badge, we all went to Savarkar's house, and then he came out and told them all in Marathi that Yashasvi hoon ya, or be successful and come back. And then that one statement became the reason to implicate him. For 1 year, the government prosecution confiscated all the letters and communication between Nathuram and Savarkar and all of them. Of course, they were acolytes. They were acolytes of Savarkar. They formed the Hindu Rashtra Dal within the Hindu Mahasabha. They were very close. But then in a political party, the president of the party is close to several people. And now if one of the party followers does something, the president cannot be held accountable for that, especially after he's relinquished the presidentship. And by 1946-47, Savarkar had 2 heart attacks. And so he was almost on his deathbed, so to say, literally convalescing, staying away from public life and all of that. So this entire thing that based on that conjecture of a police approver to actually implicate him, the court did not find any corroborative evidence or any connection between the two. Just by association, you cannot have anybody implicated, and so that's why he was the only one who was honorably exonerated from this case. Of course, later, 2 decades later, the Kapoor Commission, for various reasons, came into existence. And that also, throughout, it said that there was a Savarkarite faction which masterminded the murder, which is true. I mean, as I said, Godse and Apte were the Savarkarite faction within the Mahasabha, which was splintered between the Savarkar group, the Shama Prasad Mukherjee group in Bengal, the North Indian caucus of Jugal Kishore Birla and Raja Maheshwar Dayal Seth and all these landlords and so on, and Savarkar faction of Maharashtra. So obviously these people were part of that. So all through the Kapoor Commission report, he says the Savarkarites, but then towards not even the conclusion of the report, somewhere very innocuously in one passage, he says all this puts conclusively the evidence that Savarkar was the brain behind it. Now, on what basis, nobody knows. So, and the Kapoor Commission was challenged as recently as a couple of years ago by a dear friend, Dr. Pankaj Fadnis, who I think he said, the Kapoor Commission implicating Savarkar is a dishonor for him and so on. He filed a PIL in the Bombay High Court, which got rejected. Then he went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court appointed an amicus curiae, which sat for about 1.5, 2 years, went through all the trial papers, the Kapoor Commission, everything. And at the end of it, someone none less than Justice Bobde, the former CJI, and Justice Nageshwar Rao, in March 2018, they give a verdict saying the assumption of the petitioner that Savarkar was involved in Gandhi's murder is unfounded. And the earlier verdict of the trial court holds, because a commission of inquiry does not have the jurisdiction to overturn a trial court. And moreover, the man is dead. There's nobody was brought to represent his case. So the earlier verdict holds, and his involvement in the murder is not a right assumption. So when the highest court of the country, after so many Agni Parikshas, the verdicts have come as recent as 3 years ago, to still, for political expediency and for today's politics, to go on flogging this horse that they were behind this, he was behind this. Now, those who keep saying this, the same Kapoor Commission also unequivocally said that the RSS had no hand in the Gandhi's murder. And despite that, 20 to 25,000 RSS workers across India were put behind bars, including women and children. I mean, even if Nathuram and Apte were at some point RSS workers, that doesn't mean that you just block 25,000 people across the country. The first task that the independent government of India did was this Preventive Detention Act against so many people. For 6 to 8 months, they rotted in jail without any charges against them. You banned the organization. So let's at least accept what the Kapoor Commission said, and said that the RSS had no hand in it. So it can't chit bhi meri, pat bhi meri cannot happen, where you say, the Kapoor Commission implicated Savarkar, but still I will think that the RSS is also involved. And so in my election speeches, we will keep calling the RSS as the assassins. So I think that thing needs to be put to rest now, especially, as I said, when the highest court of the country applied its mind.
The RSS should get out of that guilt complex, which I find very often they still seem to labor under. That's quite unnecessary, actually.
I know.
So let's go to the audience question, because there are lots of them. We'll try and go through them as quickly as possible. Pratap Ramachandra, excellent discussion on Veer Savarkar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dilip Agrawal, I always have tears of pride reading and listening about Veer Savarkar. Thanks very much, Vikramji and Sanjayji, for the great discussion on my hero.
Thank you, Dilipji.
Thank you. Next, Rohit Badigar, Namaste Vikram sir. I had visited Abhinav Bharat after I came to know about it through your talk. It was just behind my art college, hiding in plain sight. The place beseeches a renovation.
I can't agree more, Rohitji. I think And the saddest part, Sanjay ji, is you come out and the chalk outside is named Nehru Chalk. Not even the place where, the first secret society of this country was formed, the Abhinav Bharat in Nashik. The first organized secret society which used to hold its meetings in a very, very small little hall on the top floor. You have to climb a rickety stairs, get there, and in that hall there is a kaleidoscope of pictures of all the heroes of the 1857 heroes and heroines, Lakshmi Bai and Hazrat Mahal and Bahadur Shah Zafar and all of them, Tatya Tope and the Vasudev Balwant Phadke, the Chafekar Bandhus, all of them, and the Abhinav Bharat positing itself as the rightful inheritor of this tradition, of where they had to take an oath to a mythical sword of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, to which they had to touch and take the arghya and say, we are dedicating ourselves to the nation from today and we will not mind sacrificing our life and all of that. So that room, in fact, was, and outside that there is a tulsi plant on which there is the Swatantra Lakshmi Murti, because all these letters were always started by Savarkar with the Swatantra Lakshmi ki Jai, and that famous Marathi poem also, Jayostute Shri Mahan Mangale Shivaspade Shubhade. So that also, I mean, Swatantra Lakshmi was venerated. So this place, he actually gave his own money to actually renovate the place and at least keep it in the way that it is still, in a manner that people can go and see. But it beseeches a renovation. Couldn't agree more with Rohit ji on that.
Right. Santosh Kumar, Namaskar. I'm Sanjay ji and Vikram Sampath ji. Thanks for the excellent session on Savarkar. Every now and then, the left cabal keeps talking about Savarkar's mercy petition. How do we debunk this? That's a long discussion, actually.
I think Santoshji, I've spoken about this in several. I've also written several articles and also spoken about this on several other YouTube, channels and interviews, where I've kind of clinically destroyed this argument that it was an apology letter, it was a mercy petition. I think the best way is to just go there and hear some of those and make up our case in a very unapologetic and in a very logical manner.
Yes, and while you do that, I might just add that clemency was a right. It was not
Yeah,
something that
yeah.
it was right under the law.
And a general amnesty that was being given to all political prisoners at that time.
Lalit Mule, when Ind Brit Army defected from Brit and joined INA in Singapore in 1942, Japanese writer Osawa wrote, Savarkar militarization policy in World War II began to take shape. VS, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we spoke about this, where
Yes.
where the militarization was done for two reasons. One was to also arm the Hindus, balance the communal composition, and also to ensure that many of these soldiers, Hindu soldiers or so, who would then get trained militarily, also defect to the INA and join them and give a feeder circuit to the INA. Because, mind you, Rash Bihari Bose who was a founder of the INA, was a die-hard worshipper of Savarkar. In fact, he formed a branch of the Hindu Mahasabha in Japan. And the letters of his that he's written to Savarkar, which I've quoted extensively in my book, this is like, literally, he says, you are the greatest leader of the times. You understand something that few others in India do. You understand geopolitics. And he constantly calls Gandhi as a collaborator of the British. And he says, I don't know how much of your actions will actually come to fruition, because that biggest supporter of British rule in India, Gandhi, will not allow all this to happen. This is Rash Bihari Bose writing to Savarkar. And then the connections that were made, Netaji calls on Savarkar in June 1940, which is when Savarkar is supposed to have told him that there is no point doing all this civil disobedience and all of this. You just leave this country, form alliances with enemy ka enemy is dost. So you go to Germany and Japan, the allied, the Axis powers, and then have this united military front against the British. And 6 months later, in Jan 1941, is when Bose escapes from Calcutta. So a lot of those dots that need to be joined.
Right. Dilip Agrawal, I think this question is
Thank
already
you,
taken.
Dilip.
Yeah,
Thank you.
this is already taken. Next. Uh, डॉक्टर चेतन सावरकर जी ने अंग्रेजों से माफ़ी मांगना ये महाराष्ट्र में एक युद्ध की प्रख्यात चाल है। गनिमी कावा, बलाढ्य शत्रु के सामने झुककर उसे बेवकूफ़ बनाना, हो सके तो उतनी सुविधाएं लेना और अंत में
बिल्कुल
उसे हराना। हाँ, तो
बिल्कुल।
महाराज शिवाजी ने भी कई बार ये काम किया था,
जी
बात सही है।
जी 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 जी।
डॉक्टर चेतन छत्रपति शिवाजी महाराज जी ने अफजल खान, दिलेर खान पुरंदर में, औरंगजेब आगरा में सबको इस चाल से टक्कर दी
जी
और हराया। बिल्कुल,
जी
एब्सोल्युटली।
बिल्कुल।
अभिजीत सुधाकर, Pranam VSJED, thanks for coming. When I felt depressed, my dad showed your book with his photo and said, always think about him when you feel down. His suffering was far bigger, but he came out strong.
Very true, very true. I mean, the kind of tortures that he faced in cellular jail, he and the other political prisoners, basic human facilities of good food, toilet, medical treatment, nothing given for hours, for days on end, solitary, 6 months of solitary confinement, and that Koluka bail punishment that they had to do every day to extract oil, whiplashes, and all of this. And he was candid enough to say that, many times I lost my self confidence and I actually wanted to commit suicide. But then it was the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and meditation and all of that, which gave him that mental strength, not only to prevent himself from ending his life, but also being a source of inspiration for the other political prisoners. All of them were calling him Bada Babu, the leader who was their spokesperson. So to also inspire all of them and then bring about jail reforms there to such an extent that a library was established in cellular jail. There was teaching of languages, of philosophy, all of that in the jail. I think all of that was a huge achievement to do, considering the kind of torturous circumstances they were put into.
Chinmay again, how can we link a continuous flow of thought for Kranti that flows from Sri Krishna down to Shivaji and Savarkar?
That's a nice thought to think of. I think, yeah, it
Nice
is.
thought,
We
actually,
can
yes.
we can think of it. Yeah.
Abhijit, so two questions. Was he against all rituals? Because if you remove all the tradition, be gone your thoughts. Could you tell about his Sadguna Vikriti?
Hmm. Yes, I think I personally do not agree, to his. I mean, to the extent that you say everything rituals. Ritual is not just a ritual, according to me. It's also an archival tradition which has come back when I sit for puja or for a yagya or havan. It's something that our ancestors did 5,000 years ago, and so it cannot be just dumped away as superstition and all of that. I think there he was a little extreme, and that's where, including his will, where he says he does not even want to do his wife's shraddha, and also his own. I mean, for your own case, you can do what you want, but then he was quite against his own wife's shraddha ceremonies to be performed. So I think that is taking things a little too far, which is why he also, I time and again repeat that he did not become this mass leader, because religion is an opium of the masses in India, and you cannot completely. It's a part of our culture, our tradition, our inheritance. Now, about the Sadgun Vikriti, the perverse virtues, that's a very good question, because that again is used time and again against him, that he advocated rape as a tool against Muslims or anything, which is completely erroneous and not at all a right way of reading this. In fact, this morning I had a huge argument with Dr. Sudhindra Kulkarni on this in a Twitter space conversation, where he also quoted this. Then this is from his Six Golden Epochs book. There, very clearly, he doesn't use it as a prescription for today, but as a commentary on the past, where he said when the invaders came to India, right from the Arabs, the Turks, and the Mongols, and all these tribes, barbaric tribes, we on our side, right from the Mahabharata days, we had all these ethics of warfare, that after sunset we will not attack, that we will not, पीछे से वार नहीं करेंगे, we are not going to attack, निहत्थे पे वार नहीं करेंगे, women, children, old people, we will not attack them. But these were virtues that only we felt. But during the earlier times, both parties accepted this ethics and codes of warfare. But when these barbaric tribes came to invade us, it was a one-sided implementation of ethics. The other side never followed all of that. They tried every Sam, Dam, Danda, Bhed to ensure that we are eliminated. But we continued with our sadgunas, saying we will be very ethical. So even if there were opportunities that came to twist the arm in a different way, which even Lord Krishna did not mind doing all these things. I mean, when Ashwathama Hatha Kunjara, when he said that in the Mahabharat war, that was completely against, it was a half lie, which he very nicely said that to defeat the evil, you can adopt all techniques. But the Rajputs, the other tribes who were defending India, the kingdoms, they completely had this unilateral assumption that we will be very, very ethical. Now, this didn't give us any brownie points. The opponent thought of us as cowards. So that is where he says, if even Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and others, if they had understood that if you put the fear of God in the opponent and said that if you do such a thing with our temples, our women, our children, our old people, you will be paid back in the same coin. If we had done that once, then they would have thought 10 times to do it, the plunder of our temples or the rape of our women. So, but then we did not do it. And that is a sadguna vikriti. It's a nice guna to have, but it is a vikriti because it is on falling on deaf ears. Both sides have to agree to a code. If only one side is doing it, then it is not good. So he makes those comments in that context in that book, saying that doesn't mean that he says in today's context he prescribes rape against any particular community. He said at that time, in the early centuries of invasions, if we had also plundered their places of worship or done what they did to our women, then they would not have dared to do this to us, and so many lives could have been saved. So I think that was the context in which we need to understand.
Actually, there's a precedent, Raja Suhail Dev, when he
Yes, yes.
defeated
Yeah,
the Salar Masood,
correct.
he followed this principle of take no prisoners and
Ah,
killed all
correct,
of them. And
correct,
after
correct.
that, we had 150 years of peace.
Yeah, yeah, and including the cows, I think he stole them away when he realized that they were going to be kept as a shield against the Hindu army.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes. So it is exactly
yeah,
as
all
you said.
in love
Krishna
and war.
Niti and Vidur Niti says, Shathe Shatyam Samacharit.
Uh, 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 uh.
Ashish Duhan, Savarkar inspired Indians joined INA. If true, then Savarkar was indirectly responsible for India's independence after Subhash.
Yes, fortunately or unfortunately, that is true, but we don't give credit to him for that. But then that's how it is. And I think Subhash Chandra Bose and the INA are the main reasons for India getting her freedom. Not that I mean that not disparaging, the non-violent movement, the mass movement, which created that sense, that urge of freedom, that sense of nationalism and all of that. But was that the ultimate cause for the British leaving us? I don't think so. Of course, the bankruptcy in the post-World War age, when Britain could not manage her colonies, but India was the most prized colony. If Britain was in an economic mess, leaving India would have been the worst thing. They would have stayed on and extracted as much wealth from India at that time when they were economically weak. The main fear that there was a revolt in the army, the naval mutiny which happened, and the acts of the INA, which is what got India her freedom, which Lord Clement Attlee himself, the Prime Minister of
Yes,
Britain, who
yes.
signed the transfer of power when he comes to India in I think 1952 or 54 to Justice Chakraborty. Is it some? There's some the
Yes,
judge of the
he was the acting governor at that time.
governor of Bengal. He says that the main reason for us to leave India was the INA, the Subhash Chandra Bose, and the revolt in the army. And when the justice asks him, what was the impact of Gandhi on your final decision and the Quit India movement, Attlee smiles and says, minimal.
Minimal.
So
Quite right. Okay. I think we need to wind up now. So I'll just take a couple questions more. Key contributions of Savarkar after coming to jail. I think it's all described in the book. Why don't you
yeah,
ever look at the book? Girish
easily.
Manerkar, fantastic discussion. Will this present BJP government give Veer Savarkar the Bharat Ratna? It might come before Maharashtra elections.
Gauriji, right question to the wrong people.
Naveen Singh. So it is thought that partition of Bengal was undone due to Hindu-Muslim unity. Hardly.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a success of what we call the Hindu Paurusha, the Anushilan Samiti.
Yes.
Abhijit Sudhakar, can another Savarkar-like thinker be born? His thoughts are still relevant today. How to create an intellectual ecosystem such that we have more Savarkars.
Yeah. I
Well,
think
I
very good
think
question.
if we keep talking about Savarkars, we probably inspire more.
Correct. I think the best way is to read about him and to read the book and then maybe understand him.
Yes. So I recommend everybody to read the book. In fact, both volumes.
Yeah.
Ratan Sheena, pranam both of you, sir. What might be the reason behind the downplaying of Savarkar by other non-Congress parties? And if current regime also failed to correct this?
I, Ratanji, I don't think I mean, the government's duty is not to correct history. That is for all of us, in civil society, historians and people who create public discourse to correct it. Any government-sponsored project, I think, will be shallow and it will not last long. So I'm glad the government is out of it. But why truth be told, I mean, for the first time, we've had a prime minister who goes to cellular jail, and it was a very symbolic gesture to actually sit in his cell there and pay his obeisances. How many other prime ministers of the past have done that? And in fact, the media or everyone did not cover that much, but among one of the first steps that the Modi government did after coming to power was to reinstall that plaque at cellular jail, which Manishankar Iyer had got displaced. So now there is a smarak there which is commemorating Savarkar. But yeah, to your question as to why the non-Congress, I think the other parties which don't like him, for various reasons. One is this whole, it's a very uncomfortable truth which we discussed, like what was the reason for India getting her freedom, who are the other people. So many of these characters who played a very vital role have been sidelined in our historiography. And also, I think in his case, it's a double whammy because he was also the harbinger of Hindutva. And so today, if you have to attack those parties which claim to be proponents of Hindutva, then you need to attack the ideological ancestor who was Savarkar. Without even keeping in mind that Savarkar was never part of the RSS. He had some very critical things to say about the RSS. They had differences of opinion on several issues, but then in a very broad brush, everybody is called Hindutvavadis, and then everybody is said, "What is your role in the freedom struggle?" And like Mallikarjun Kharge in Parliament had challenged the Prime Minister and said, even your dogs did not fight for the freedom struggle. So that mentality that there was only one struggle, and so we, the people who were part of that struggle, the dynasty, we are the legal inheritors to the throne of India, and if anybody else who is sitting there is a usurper, I think that entitlement mindset is very deeply rooted. And so that is why in all of this, characters like Savarkar and history becomes a casualty.
Okay, with that, I think I'll bring the curtain down on this discussion. And any other questions, you may please write it directly to Jaipur Dialogues, and we'll happily forward it to Vikram Sampath ji for his reactions. So thank you very much, Vikram ji, and
Thank you,
thank you
Sanjay.
all viewers.
Thank you.
Wonderful
Thank you.
interaction. Jai
Thank,
Hind, Vande Mataram.
thank you.